today. Thanks very much for joining us. And we're very much pleased to hear your views on how you see progress so far in achieving our internal energy market in Europe.
Well, I think there has been real progress. I think that a few years ago, if we'd have seen the amount of progress there'd been looking forward, we would have probably liked to have anticipated a major political breakthrough and expected none. What in fact I think has happened is that we have made progress on many different fronts, many of them technical, many of them difficult, some of them politically very sensitive. But if you look, I think probably the most obvious is in terms of market coupling. If you look at the range that has been achieved from north to south of Europe, it is truly remarkable. And what we're seeing is the benefits of this in terms of the integration of the market, the closer collaboration between countries, and the benefits to interconnection.
Indeed. And on the flip side of the developments and the efforts that we've all been making, where do you see the stumbling blocks and where more progress might be needed?
It's easier to see stumbling blocks than it is to identify where the progress is going to be made. I think first, there is still in some parts of Europe a hesitation to recognise that Europe is a reality and that interconnection and greater collaboration and greater development of market is going to happen. And until that political and to some extent technical realisation is achieved, we will see an inferior performance in terms of integrated markets. But where we really want to see is the much greater reflection between wholesale and retail prices, where really it's quite remarkably poor that some of the integration is not yet feeding through into the retail markets. That's an area I think we really need to tackle in a big way.
All right. And for the regulators, in terms of our role and what we can contribute to these efforts and to these big questions and turning them to reality.
I think we're pretty good at being a little bit bureaucratic at times. I think where we really deliver major progress is when we actually are able to shed the role of being national regulators and when we move into being European regulators. And I think you see that in working groups very efficiently. I think people have become much more aware of the wider dimension and a much greater commitment to tackling the big issues rather than trying to protect narrow national interests. So it's a challenge, but I think that's one of the areas. And I think the other area is we have to be very agile in communicating to political masters, be they in the European Parliament, be they in the European Council, be they in the national governments. What I think regulators have is an expertise and hopefully an ability to convey that expertise in a language that is understandable to others. And I think it's getting better.
Indeed. And with that in mind, you've been around for much of the development of our European cooperation of regulators through AREGEG to CEER and ACER. And how have you seen that grow over the years?
Well, I've seen it grow. I think that's one of the remarkable things is that people now talk to people all over Europe because they meet. And I've never underestimated how important it is to be able to pick up a telephone and have a conversation with somebody that you actually know, as opposed to trying to find the telephone number of somebody you don't know in order to deal with a particular problem or to ask advice. And I think the coming together in the agency and in CEER, what that's brought is a realisation that others face similar problems, not necessarily identical problems, that others have good ideas, best practice, all of those things, something that I think has developed very strongly. I think over the years, I would say people have become more European-minded, certainly than I would have envisaged, although my background is primarily European, more European than people would have ever imagined in the past.
Great. And perhaps maybe a word for the younger staff in our regulatory authorities. If there are one nut to crack and they're the future who are going to deal with these things, where do you think they should focus?
I would quote something that youth is wasted on the young. I think to realise that you may not have necessarily the power in terms of a hierarchical position, but to realise that expertise is a wonderful password to achieving progress, and communicable expertise is even more efficient. And so from my perspective, I think I would identify, because I think it's so important, retail markets. If I wanted to make a prophecy of where a younger person could really make a difference, it would be in the retail markets area, the energy retail markets area, where there are huge things to do, and I think, frankly, an inadequate level of expertise out amongst consumers and consumer organisations to be able to deliver that expertise. That's the area I point upon.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time.
I'm absolutely delighted.